Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much to all organizations and for the invitation to be here. It was a hard act to follow, actually, and I thought the best way after my introduction to follow it is to recite a poem. This poem is entitled Oranges from the Bosphorus. And, you know, I just have to tell you, part of integrating our lives with anyone else's is really to tell stories and to be communicative with others. So in this poem, the way it originated was many years ago. At that time, my boyfriend, but now my husband, we were going to breakfast. And you know, I was telling him about the time that I was in Istanbul. We were driving around the Bosphorus, and I was getting a really bad headache. And my aunt, noticing that, decided to stop and give me some oranges that they were selling along the water. And as soon as I had the oranges, I felt so much better. He said, you know, that's funny. He said, because in Cuba, they put oranges in the refrigerator to make their worries go away. Really? So, this is the way this poem started. Oranges from the Bosphorus. She fed me oranges and my worries went away. On the road from the Bosphorus, I spit the seeds out the window of the small white car speeding down the mountain. At 15, I planted my memory there on the dirt road and found the beginning of where my skin was born, on the hands of all my grandmothers, waving to me on that dirt road, shouting their stories in the wind so I can hear their echo even in the speeding car, and carry voices in my pocket, eating oranges, laughing and telling jokes in another language, and smiling each time I see an old woman, reminding me of all my grandmothers and all their sad eyes staring at me, watching me leave the land where they were born, hoping I take a piece of them with me to remember when I am old. And really, I think that's why we're here today, to try to figure out how we bridge that, how we bridge the vision of what we know and where they come from to where we are today. You know, I remember some years ago, I was just talking about how I teach, and I've taught poetry in Glendale quite a bit because I live there, but I've taught all over LA. But one class that I taught in Glendale, I had 36 kids. It was a summer program for 4 weeks. Those high school kids had 4 hours of poetry a day, 4 days a week. That is a lot of poetry. And much more than anyone would ever want, except me, maybe. But what I had to do is I had to hook them. How was I going to hook them? So, and let me just tell you, and no offense to the boys in the room, but I had more boys in the 36 than I had girls. So they were a little bit more suspicious of poetry than the girls were. Needless to say, I convinced the boys, I think, even more than the girls by the end of the 4 weeks. However, the one time that I had them quiet for more than 20 minutes, 36 kids, not a drop. And by the way, they were all Armenian, except for one. Was when I told them the story about my great-great-grandmother Akabi during the first genocide. During this time, as all of you know, in 1896, my family is from Gesaya, or Kayseri, as it's known in Turkish. All the men had gone to work. Typical, right? The men went to work, the soldiers came out. The soldiers came out and went to the one house down the way. And by the time they were done with that house was burning. When my great-grandmother Akabi saw that, they had money, they were wealthy. She had the butler get his rifle, she got her rifle, the kids went into the storage space where they kept the food. And so there were probably about 5 children, my 2 great-grandmothers being in that group. And she said, open all the windows. When you open all the windows, just a crack, just enough to get the rifle through. She said, I want you to shoot. But when you shoot, she said, shoot to the ground, to the dirt. Do not kill anybody, because she understood that her neighbors were dying because they decided that they needed to shoot and kill somebody. And that's what happened. So she didn't want to kill anyone, she just wanted to scare them. But in her scaring them, as they came closer, one of the sergeants came. The sergeant said, "Wait a minute," he said. He said, "Don't kill the Telfayans because they employ our people." And they were lucky. They didn't get it that moment. They decided, my great-great-grandfather said, "We will never lay our heads on our pillows in Yasaria again." And by the next day, they put everything away and they started to make their journey to Istanbul. But in that time, in those 20 minutes, those kids, the story was obviously longer, I only have 20 minutes right now, but they didn't say a word. They didn't say a word because they wanted to know that story. It wasn't their story, but they wanted to know the story because still it was about who they are and where they come from. So as we go through this session, please believe that children and adults want to hear stories. You know, my grandmother, that was the one story she would tell me. The other story she would tell me is that great-grandmother, Akabi, who was the mother of both my grandmothers, I have to say that both my grandmothers, their children married each other. So my grandparents were first cousins. And I used to say to my grandmother, you know, that's not good. She'd get very upset with me. But she would tell another story about Akabi. She said she was a healer. So when Badet was showing that on the screen, that Armenian women, and I think women around the world, are healers, she was also a healer. There was someone who came through Yasaria who, for whatever reason, realized how she was as a person and gave her the ointment to clear what he called the leke of Dikanagensis, which means it's a stain. So, you know, my grandmother would tell me these stories, and back then I would be like, okay, grandma, you know, but I would listen. But she would repeat it, and it was the same story over and over again. So go forward about 40 years. In the middle of this project, when I went to visit Rita Vorperian and her mom, is she here by any chance?
No.
Do you all know who she is? Of course.
Yes.
Okay. So here I am in their house, and the mother is showing me some of her tzerakot, some of her work. And I didn't know where they were from. I just decided I was going to tell a couple of stories, and this was one of them. And all of a sudden, they both look at me and they say, "We're Dikanagensis, and we have the leke right here." And I thought, oh my gosh, how is that possible that that story that my grandmother told, that her mother told her about her mother, you know, that's over 100 years old, has made it to Glendale in the middle of the Vorperian's home, and I just made a connection with them and my great-great-grandmother. So this is what happens when you, one, make the decision to integrate where you come from into yourself. You have to make that choice. That is a conscious choice you make. Some people don't have to make it consciously. I think they just begin to tell the stories. But for others, you need to make that decision that that's what you're going to do. So these dresses came about because my grandmother got very ill back in Queens, New York, where I'm from, New Jersey. And we needed to put her in a home because we were living here in LA. And my uncle couldn't take care of her, so we put her in the Emerson home, Armenian home there. And when my mother arrived there at the time, this is back like in 1999, she was telling me over the phone about all the things that she found, but I could never realize the tens, almost, you know, about 60 bokhjas. Do you all know what bokhjas are? Yes. So for some of you who maybe don't, it's how, you know, even the Japanese wrap, the old-fashioned way of opening a piece of cloth, putting your items in there, and then wrapping it back. I found them with my mother in closets, tons of closets, and I thought, wait a minute, we're in Queens, New York. How are we going to get this up? I said, I can't leave it here. How can I leave all of this here? I thought, I just found my ancestors. I got to bring them back to California. My house was like mothballs. I smelled mothballs for months in my house. But this is what I got to bring back. This is a small portion of what I got to bring back. So in this process, I realized, this exhibit and me sitting up here is for me to be a mirror to you, a reflection of ourselves, about the human element that we all bring into the world. And part of that is telling stories. I think metaphor is a bit older than story, but story follows. And for each of us, standing and walking and breathing, we are story, and we are poetry, and we are metaphor. So I want you to think about the top 3 stories you would love to tell your descendants, or for them to know. Think about the 3 you would never want them to know. That's just for you, unless you change your mind. But I always think that it's important for us to know and to frame everything in that way. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, for those of you who read any of his work, there's this part he talks about in his book, Living to Tell the Tale. He says, life is not what one lived, but what one remembers, and how one remembers it in order to recount it. So really, the job is to know how to recount it. And I think it's also to know who to recount it to. Because even though everybody should hear the stories, you know that there are going to be certain people who are going to then be able to carry those stories for you as time goes on. So it ends up becoming a conscious act. And I think, like in anything, if we choose not to make a decision, the decision is made too. So this is an opportunity to make the decision to pass on what you know. And it's not just the story of our ancestors, but how we reflect on it too. It's part, because we're the ones telling the story, it's becoming part of our story as well. So don't forget that part as well. You are as integral to the story as the part of your ancestors. How many people here know stories about their ancestors? Are lucky enough? How many people take or have the opportunity to tell those stories? How many people wish they would do it more often? Sure. Okay, so this is a chance to have you think about that and to even write it down, even before you leave today. What's that story going to be? Who did I always want to tell that story to? In the process of doing all of this, that story that I told you about, the one where the lieutenant says, don't kill the Telfeans because they employ our people. It's so funny because in my life, in addition to being a poetry teacher, I also do strategic partnerships. And it's so funny, I never connected it to that until recently. I thought, I love creating partnerships. And I thought, wow, I had no idea it stemmed from so long ago. Here they were, realizing that in their community, they decided to create these strategic partnerships with their neighbors. And for that moment, right, it saved their life. That didn't happen with everybody. It just happened to happen with them. So the dresses. I have dowry items. Now tradition is good, but I don't believe in keeping all traditions. I don't know about all of you, but there are some traditions that women had that I am so glad are gone. So I think it's important that when we talk about tradition and we talk about stories, that we also are clear that we don't always want to keep everything the same. Is to think about how we evolve. When my great-grandmother, Victoria, was asked to marry my grandfather, Dilsizia, in 1901, she said, I'll marry you, but I want to get my college diploma first.
Wow.
So that was really unusual. That was breaking tradition. So it was really exciting when I found these dresses that I found a wedding dress. And in this wedding dress, what I did was I looked back at photos I was lucky enough to have, and I saw that it was Victoria's wedding dress. And after I saw it was Victoria's wedding dress, the person who I had gotten for the grant, who is a textile expert from Cal State LA, Carol Tuntlin, she said, but you know, she said she used it for something else. I said, oh, what could she have used it for? And I remember at that point, she and my mom left, and I was sitting in my apartment and I thought, okay, Victoria, men's minded, what did you use this for? Look, and I was just kind of talking out loud, and I thought, well, let me look at the picture. Let me look at the dress. Oh, I thought, wait, I have a picture of her graduation. And then I had a diploma. So I looked at all of that, and I realized that she wore the dress for her wedding. She must have finished her coursework because her diploma was a month after. She altered her wedding dress, and she used it for her college graduation. And I have to tell you, that moment of realizing it was pretty awesome. And I feel very blessed, very grateful that I've had an opportunity to do all of this, because I've had this information, because my grandmother had some of this material culture that so many of us don't have. That's why I felt that it was my responsibility to not just showcase my family, but to showcase them